Let me now turn it over to Sue Rankin, who is at Penn State and also works with Campus Pride, and is going to give us an overview of some really fabulous research that they've been doing. Sue?
Sue Rankin from Penn State, and you can see the slides that are up here for you. I want to go through them relatively quickly. I want to thank you again for the opportunity to do this. The importance here around, for me, is that this is how you get this off to your administration and other faculty, which is that campus climate affects students, and it affects their learning, and it affects their development. And this slide kind of talks about those things. In particular, looking at LGBTQ campus climate, in a 2003 study that I did, we looked at climate for students on campuses and found that there's a lot of discrimination and harassment. It's a small study. Since that time, there's been other people doing work on this as well. Found that there are perceptions of campus climate studies. There are other studies talking about harassment and violence. Others looking at some of the programs that are more successful or some best practices. So I want to try and quickly go through some of the research around this so you have some ammunition to actually use with your administration when trying to do this from a perspective of folks that don't know much about our work. So if you look at this next slide, it talks about if you have positive experiences with climate and perception of climate, you have success. For students, that means positive educational experiences and healthy identity development. And that leads to persistence and retention. And that's a really big thing. We're seeing lots of students, both in high school, in GLSEN's report, and then also in our report and the work that also NCTE and NGLTF are doing, that students are dropping out. They aren't persisting. And dropping out via suicide is obviously the most final way of dropping out. But there's lots of information about this influencing their persistence and retention as well as their ability to succeed in school. In our 2010 report, you can see if you go to Campus Pride website, you can download the executive summary and get a copy of the full report. We had lots of people respond. In particular, we had lots of folks responding as along different gender identity continuums and along different queer spectrum. So one of the things that we've learned is that language is important and that language is changing on a daily basis, and my students teach me all the time about how that language changes. We had many people of color respond to the surveys, looking at intersection identities, looking at not just one's individual identity as sexual or gender, but also looking at race, spirituality, et cetera. And the next slide kind of gives you an idea of some of the ways that folks responded when we asked them what your identities are, both a gender identity and their sexual identity. We also asked people to respond in regards to some of the important findings. We found that queer spectrum students hide their identities, and more across trans spectrum hiding their gender identities to identify or not to experience intimidation. We found that they fear for their physical safety on their campuses. We found that they experienced harassment, and that this happens much more across a trans spectrum than it did across sexual identity. So it was improved since 2003 around sex identity, but had regressed, in fact, in regards to trans spectrum. We wanted to allow voices to be heard, so within the report we provide not only quantitative data, but also some of the qualitative piece, which I found to be incredibly troubling in 2010. We provided a kind of a sampling here of those voices, and we provide many more of those within the report, examining how students actually are talking about experiencing their climate. The takeaways for us, for the biggest pieces for me, were that over a third of the queer spectrum and trans spectrum students have seriously considered leaving their institution because of the climate. And they identified that those were harassment kinds of environments, harassing environments, and also that they weren't respected by their faculty. We also talked about already about them concealing their identity, so avoid intimidation and fearing for their physical safety. So if you look again back at their original persistence, if we have negative kinds of climate, then in fact that decreases their persistence and retention. So we really are trying to increase that among our LGBT students. The difficult thing about doing research on queer spectrum or trans spectrum students, faculty, and staff is that there are no national databases that look at those. The national studies that are done, the Student Engagement Survey, which is NESI, the SERP study, which is the first-year student study, and the Common Application, none of those include sex identity or gender identity as part of their questions. And so these are all convenience samples, which oftentimes are critiqued or criticized by my other colleagues in doing this research. So unfortunately, I encourage currently on college campuses, there are only 7% that have any kind of institutional support. That means somebody is paid or part of their job or all of their job to assist LGBTQ students. Only 13% have sexual orientation and non-discrimination policy. Only 6% have gender identity. And these policies, while even if we have them, may not reflect change or be a catalyst for actions. At least it shows that the institution has something in place to support and/or show visible support for their students. So we do provide in the report, this is headings to the different areas that we talk about in regards to in being more inclusive and therefore being more welcoming and changing the climate. Inclusive policies, institutional commitment, integrating the curriculum. As a faculty member, that's my biggest thing, is trying to get more things in the curriculum that was mentioned earlier. Responding some way appropriately to those anti-gay incidents if they occur. Considerations for housing and health care, especially for trans students. And then improving access and retention efforts among the institution. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Sue.